Is your child ready for sex? Well, you may not think they are, but they certainly may be learning otherwise at school. Pay attention, New York. While already taught in many schools across our state, comprehensive sexuality education will soon be mandated for every kindergarten through 12th grade student if bills currently in legislative committee are passed. These bills call for sex ed to, at a minimum, conform to the content and scope of the national sex education standards. Parents need to be informed. These standards are self-declared to be sex positive, meaning that schools will no longer promote abstinence, even though research shows many benefits for children who delay their sexual activity, like higher relationship satisfaction, less likelihood of a marriage ending in divorce, and obviously less likelihood of teenage pregnancy and STDs. Being sex positive also means that schools will no longer suggest sex is best saved for committed relationships. Instead, the message is, you're ready when you say you are. Comprehensive sex ed curriculums use role plays that normalize children having sex, even with multiple partners. Here are specific examples of standards. In kindergarten through second grade, one standard reads, define consent. This is quite early to be grooming children to consent to sexual activity. In middle school, one standard suggests they define sexual consent and sexual agency. Curious what they're teaching your 11-year-old about sexual agency? This is the definition they use. Sexual agency includes the ability to give consent to participate in and/or decline sexual behaviors, to choose whether or not to engage in sexual behaviors in a specific way with a specific person and/or at a specific time and place, the ability to choose safer sex practices, including contraception, and the right to choose to define one's sexuality, sexual orientation, and gender. Essentially, children are taught they have the right to choose everything about their sexuality, including when they are ready to have sex. When this is taught without addressing boundaries for healthy sex or benefits of abstinence, this is encouraging children to have sex whenever and with whomever they want. This perspective leaves kids incredibly vulnerable to abuse. It is clear this is not taught through the lens of protecting kids from others pressuring them to have sex. If that were so, the focus would be on abstinence, boundaries, and how to say no. Instead, these standards heavily focus on teaching kids how to consent to sexual activity. They also teach them all about different types of sex and give them thorough lessons on how to use various types of contraception. Here are some of the standards taught at the same time as sexual agency. Define vaginal, oral, and anal sex, where the definitions of vaginal and anal sex include the use of sex toys. And describe the steps to using barrier methods correctly, example, external and internal condoms and dental dams. This leads to role plays where children, some of whom have not yet reached puberty, are practicing putting condoms on penis models in class. Why would the national sex ed standards teach children to consent to sex so early? Back to the definition of sexual agency, the national sex ed standards believe children have the right to choose to define their own sexuality. Well, how do the national sex ed standards define sexuality? Sexuality is defined as the components of a person that include their biological sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, sexual practices, sexual fantasies, attitudes, and values related to sex. Sexuality describes how one experiences and expresses oneself as a sexual being. It begins to develop at birth and continues over the course of one's lifetime. Yes, the national sex ed standards believe your child is sexual from birth. One of the main creators of these standards is SECUS, whose slogan is Sex Ed for Social Change. This organization was founded by Mary Calderon, a medical director for Planned Parenthood, who is quoted saying to parents, "Children are sexual and think sexual thoughts and do sexual things. Parents must accept and honor their child's erotic potential." Professionals who study children have recently affirmed the strong sexuality of the newborn. Who are these professionals? Who is claiming your child should be learning sexually explicit material in school because they're sexual from birth? The main researcher is Dr. Kinsey, who is known for his fraudulent and highly abusive work. His research documented notes from known pedophiles who would detail their abuse of children between 5 months and 14 years old, counting and describing the children's orgasms. The abusers detail the child's response to the sexual stimulation and count responses such as sobbing, weeping, fighting, hysteria, and even fainting as normal responses to orgasm. The chart in this picture is from his work. This research was not only highly abusive, but also fundamentally flawed and widely questioned by leading scientists. Yet, his ideas are driving your child's sex ed. Our kids deserve better. Comprehensive sexuality education exposes our young children to explicit content far too mature for their age and encourages premature sexual autonomy. It's time for an important conversation. What are our kids being taught, and what are we going to do about it? In summary, children are being sexualized through today's sex ed. School may no longer be a safe place for your child. Parents, it's time to protect your kids.